Hey everyone, this is Mike Kendall,
And I am Kavita Apachu.
and we are your hosts for Shift, brought to you by Moves the Needle. Our hope for you is that we can inspire you to make a difference as we learn from some of the top innovation leaders around the globe and learn how they're making an impact. On today's show, we're proud to have Steve Portigal, principal at the Portigal Consulting Group, with us. He's going to talk to us a little bit about driving innovation using the power of strategic insights. Steve has helped companies like Sony, Nestle, and Belkin discover and act on new insights about their customers and themselves. Before we jump in, though, we'd like to let you know about a special offer that Moves the Needle is making available exclusively to our listeners. For the next week, you can sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching, and you'll learn about our customer solution Zoom tool. This powerful and simple tool will help you understand how to quickly zoom in, understand what problems your customers have, how to meet those needs that they may have, and especially in this time of uncertainty, try to solve those things quickly. Companies like Capital One, 7-Eleven, and Humana, and many other leading companies have used this tool to create new growth opportunities. So sign up at the link on your screen and you are in.
And now I'd like to welcome our guest, Steve Portigal. As Mike mentioned, Steve is principal at Portigal Consulting. He helps companies to think and act strategically when innovating with user insights. He has conducted research with thoracic surgeons, families eating breakfast, rock musicians, home automation enthusiasts, credit default swap traders, and radiologists. His work has informed the development of medical information systems, professional audio gear, wine packaging, design systems, video conferencing technology, and music streaming services. He is also the host of Dollars to Donuts podcast, where he interviews people who lead user research in their organizations, where I might add, I had the honor of being a guest at a very thought-provoking and insightful session. He has authored several books, including Doorbells, Danger and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. It is like a book of short stories that keeps you engaged from cover to cover. There's humor, suspense, and drama. And you gain a deep understanding of user research. Steve is also an accomplished presenter who speaks about culture, innovation, and design at companies and conferences across the globe. Welcome, Steve, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's cool to hear you just say all this stuff about me. So I just feel like I could just sit back and that could be the thing. Say more things, but no.
Absolutely. Hey, I hope I did justice because
That's great. Thank you.
You rock. All right. So let's start with, these are strange times we are living in. And how have you and your pets been holding up during this coronavirus lockdown?
I think we're holding up fine. I mean, this is certainly a time to examine one's own privilege and think about what there is to be grateful for, because we're certainly exposed to stories kind of all up and down of hardships, tragic hardships and just everyday challenges. So, we're all in the same boat, but I think some people are feeling some pretty serious challenges, economic or just time and space and competing demands. I think pretty grateful for, the context that we have. What my day-to-day, what my circumstances, I feel very fortunate to be doing okay.
So now I'm going to sort of switch gears a little bit. I noticed you dedicated your book on interviewing users to your mom, Sharna. Could you share with us the role she played in encouraging you to be curious?
Yeah, I was raised by a single mother who wanted her children, myself and my younger sister, to, have experiences and opportunities beyond those which she had. We were told that explicitly, that anything is possible. Being given the opportunity to have that much possibility, I think, was, again, something that I'm just very, very fortunate to have been given. What are the conditions in which curiosity can take place? My mother would tell me stories about history and about her family, and would answer my questions. And I remember when I was like a formative experience, this may be a weird one, but a formative experience as a young kid is I found a box of old Mad magazines. And at the time they were old. They were probably like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years in the past. I've been sitting in the house. And at various times, Mad Magazine had been pretty political. It sort of devolved into fart jokes over the years, but it had been a lot of social commentary and political commentary around different kinds of, social unrest in the United States in the 70s. And I remember reading these things, and because it seemed like it's a comic book, right? But you read it and it's describing, just a lot of adult stuff and a lot of sort of adult punchlines and political things. And I just remember going and asking my mom about things that were in this. Like, what is this? Why is this? Why is this funny? Explain this punchline. And I was always allowed to do that. And I would get answers. I would get explanations about things. And I learned about the world, not just the time that I'd been in, but other places and other times and kind of shifting contexts, through, again, a box of old magazines that we found that, kind of struck me as being something interesting. There was no sort of secret reading of those. And, I had access to the information in my home. It was all right to ask questions, and it was, good to get answers about that.
Well, thank you. I think that totally makes sense. And it was all about nurturing your curiosity that sort of gave you validation and evolved to who you are, you being who you are today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those. I had very visual images kind of pop up as you were sharing the Mad Magazine stories and the artwork on the covers. I guess those were just kind of iconic of the time, right? So yeah, appreciate that story. So wanted to dig into your brain and your background a little bit about some of the professional endeavors you've been a part of, and hopefully some of those stories you can dig out will help some of our viewers and listeners. But I'm wondering if you can think about maybe one or more of some of the common mistakes that product designers or leaders tend to make or miss, things that they miss maybe when they're developing or coming up with a new product or a new solution for a customer problem.
I mean, at the risk of sounding flip, to a certain extent, nobody cares. And what I mean by that is, it's easy and understandable to get kind of caught up in a specific improvement you want to make, or a change, or a plan, or a roadmap, and to feel like that's going to have impact. And I don't mean that we're operating in a vacuum, right? Someone has asked for this. We've seen it be a problem. We have some new gizmo or way of doing things that's better. Our competitors have, moved ahead of us. There's lots of signal that says, hey, something we're going to do is going to have impact. But it's, I think sometimes we we breathe our own exhaust. We get caught up in thinking hey, this is a big deal. We, you see this kind of culturally in companies. They start using some jargon around an initiative or around a feature or something. Mm-hmm. And it starts to be sort of self-perpetuating and becomes disconnected. Again, even if it originates in connection with a need or an observed shortcoming, it takes on a level of importance that sort of disconnects it from what it really looks like. And And so then I think, then it spirals, right? You put it out there or you test it. You don't get the kind of uptake or reaction that you want. You don't know why. And so you kind of go back to try to fix it. And like the mistake is the failure to understand in context, right? You're going to make a thing that goes from here to here, now go from here to here. And that's like a lot better. But, you fail to zoom out, right? And zoom out and zoom out. And, people have this going on, they have this going on, they're thinking about this, they're trying to accomplish this, and so on and so forth. And your thing is like a problem or a benefit, like at the moment that it occurs, when it invites you not to pay attention or suffer through something annoying, but like it's over after that. So, when I say nobody cares, I mean, it's just that we are immersed in thinking about something, and the people who we want to benefit are not. And I mean, that's what we're all trying to do, right? Is try to understand what that really looks like and kind of bring that back. But, you have to sort of nurture that connection between what we know and believe about people and how we're talking about responding to it. And that, if you don't nurture it, they sort of distort and morph, and suddenly you've magnified something and kind of lost track of like, and no one cares. No one cares doesn't mean this is crappy and we shouldn't do it. It means don't sort of overinflate the importance and significance of what you want to do, because it's important to you, but it might not be important to them in the way. And then, if we want to get really pedantic, like what does important mean? I mean, you could tear this down and tear it down and tear it down, but I guess I'm really talking about that disconnect and kind of the frameworks that we hold around the problem, the need, and the improvement that we kind of control, and then, how it's experienced for the people that we want to design and build for.
So as you see that come up over and over again, I'm assuming, since it kind of came straight out of, as an answer, what are the implications for companies as well as for customers when you see that kind of behavior?
I mean, if left unchecked, I think there's a risk of over-investing or of missing the point, sort of solving, if there's a bunch of behaviors, a bunch of interactions that are connected, you can kind of choose to intervene over here as opposed to intervening over here. I talked to someone once, actually on my podcast years ago, who talked about local maxima, which was really, again, about zooming out. So if you have kind of a graph and you just zoom right in, you can see what the high points on that graph are. And so you can, optimize for that. But if you don't zoom out and sort of see, like, what does that graph look like? What are the high and low points? So you're kind of zooming in too close. And I think that's an artifact of that being disconnected. So you invest, you overinvest, like things don't have an impact. I'm trying to talk about this without saying moves the needle, but I feel like that's the best phrase for what we're talking about. You want to move the needle, and yet you're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. So you're not going to get that kind of outcome. And for customers, right, there's nothing, it's like always like some cold water in the face when you see an improvement to something that you use. Maybe there's like an update on your iPhone for an app, and it's like, now we've got this. And you're like, but really, like the problem is this. The problem is over here, and we all know it. And why don't you know it? And why are you trumpeting your improvements over here? And that starts to change the dynamic, the relationship that we as a customer have with a company when they're very excited about solving the wrong problem. It doesn't endear us to them.
Yeah, it's kind of a trite statement maybe now, but the phrase falling in love with your solution as opposed to falling in love with the customer's problem, is maybe what you're getting at.
Yes. And I mean, it's natural, right? So, you can't just say, well, don't fall in love with the solution. It's natural. So, how do you mitigate that? How do you keep checking yourself against
my baby is never ugly, right? It's always a beautiful baby.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very natural response. We are encouraged, right? And at least in the society that we're all in, to have pride in our work and to advocate for our work with our colleagues, and to sell, to brand ourselves a little bit. So how do you do that in a way that's kind of healthy and that is, I mean, I like what you said, right? It's, you want to fall in love with something and be an advocate for it, but shift that, redirect that, right? Be an advocate for your customer's problem, not your solution.
Yeah.
I think still harnesses that kind of energy, but in a more healthy way.
So you're probably on one of my short lists as far as somebody to have dinner with, because I'm sure you have some interesting stories from the field, and you've even written a book about it. But what, maybe if you'd like to share one of those stories with our listeners, maybe the either strangest or craziest story from the field when you're out either coaching or helping one of your clients try to get customer insights.
This was it's probably a couple of years ago. I was talking to small businesses about finances, and we worked with a company to find us participants, a market research recruiting agency. We had a hard time finding someone who would take this on because it was kind of an over-tapped market at the time. There was a lot of, we have to talk to small businesses. So to find someone who hadn't overutilized their database. When we found somebody, they found us a lot of people. They were all really good. We get to near the end of the study. It always happens near the end of the study. I call up this person just to confirm and kind of, finalize. It's going to be two of us. We're coming out there. We want to interview you. Here's what it's about. This was all what he had been told already. He's got a really different idea. He's really anxious. Why are you coming? I told them I had an office that was too small. We kind of negotiated it would be all right. So I went back to the recruiting company and kind of verified, you're telling people this. Oh yes, we told him, we spoke with him, we told him this. And he calls me back an hour later, or emails me, says, hey, I see that you're someone that does professional services. You're not coming to sell me anything, are you? And, no, I'm definitely not. So, I mean, I have empathy for this guy, right? He's getting some signals. He's not sure. I don't want someone to come to my office to interview me and then try to sell me something. I absolutely get why you wouldn't want that. But he's claiming that he was never told this, and so he's kind of double checking. And when we go to the interview, of course I'm uncertain because I know that he's uncertain. And we start the interview and we get a little ways in, and he stops and he kind of asks again, who's doing this work? What are you using this information for? And these are all good questions to ask, right? Someone should be certain about this on one hand. On the other hand, I feel like we have been as clear as possible in communicating this. And so I don't sort of know what to make of this pushback. And it feels really strong to me that he is really kind of getting aggressive with us. And in fact, after the interview, I went back and checked what was on the recording. It actually wasn't like that, but it felt like that for me. So, the stories are all distorted by your own perception of your recall. But it shook my confidence because I'd gotten sort of pushed back by him so many times that now I became more of a pleaser. All my questions were sort of framed around trying to mitigate any possible negative pushback from him, or trying to reassure him, or trying to soothe him. And this is not a good way to conduct an interview. You have to be able to ask questions and not feel so self-conscious the way that I did. So I left, and it's just, again, there's all these mixed signals. Is it him? Is it me? Is it neither? Is it the recruiter? What's kind of going on here? He just seems kind of, based on how he's feeling about this, he feels kind of defensive and territorial. And then I get a LinkedIn request from him, after the interview, which is not a typical, I don't want to say normal, I don't mean to judge it, but not a typical way that people respond. You're a researcher, you're from a company, you're not a peer to be networked with. And so, again, he clearly liked something about the exchange. So then I just keep flipping back and forth. How do I feel about what happened, and how do I interpret these things, my own behavior, his own reactions? Anyway, the story ends when he writes me a few weeks later. Oh, I should say we I never do this, but in this case, I decided to have this recruiting company send incentive payments out by mail like a week after or something like that. Usually I would bring money and just arrange to handle it myself, but I decided for whatever reason to kind of let them handle it. So he writes me after a few weeks, says he hasn't got his money. I contact the recruiting agency to like, hey, what's going on? They said, yeah, he already called and yelled at one of our admin people, and we've taken him off our list. So, I mean, the story ends, to me, it's still unresolved. Like, it's not really about right or wrong, but, you know, there are messages communicated, and you expect them to be kind of consumed in a certain way. And I have respect and concern for anybody that is uncertain about the messages. And, like, I know what it's like not to get a check. I know what it's like to be kind of corralled into getting pitched by somebody I don't want to be pitched by. So I understand his concern about all of those. But myself and my recruiting agency, we did our best effort to not have that happen and not have that feeling happen. So, you know, there is no end to the story. It's like, well, who's at fault? Who's responsible? Is this guy wrong? Did we fail in our best practices, or all, or both, or none? I mean, it's just it's the messiness of those kinds of transactions, of those kinds of relationships and communications, when you just have the X factor of people thrown in there.
Yeah, I remember years ago somebody said this, and it stuck with me, that when you're working with people, it's always going to be messy.
Yes, which is like a bug and a feature, right? I mean, I think I like the messiness of it.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, the upside of this story is that it forced me to repeatedly question myself, like to look at my assumptions and say, well, maybe we're not doing it right. Maybe, you know, to have a little more diligence. And again, I think we did everything right, but I also can't just assume that's always going to be the case.
It's one of the, is it me or is it you? Or I'm not really sure, right? Yeah. So maybe kind of drilling a little bit more into that fear emotion that sometimes we have as researchers. What advice, or what's the best advice you would give, or that you've had, on how, as a researcher, to overcome sort of that fear of asking the real probing question, to get to the deep empathy or the deep insights or the deep emotion about pain or aspiration? Because I think, at least for me, a lot of us have that. How do you break through that and really pull something out of somebody that might be a little uncomfortable for you as the interviewer?
Well, I think you nailed it, right? It's about what's uncomfortable for you as the interviewer. So having the clarity to understand what's the difference between what's uncomfortable for you and what's uncomfortable for them. I think I think we conflate those, and we hold ourselves back as researchers because we're uncomfortable with that. So, you know, having maybe taking some time to reflect about that beforehand, and think about, you know, what's okay and what's not okay. And I think I see this come up all the time. And, you know, people offer us clues to things that are going on in their lives. You know, they'll make references to relationships or childhood issues or financial issues. And I think we wield enormous power. Maybe we don't even realize that we do. And so that power needs to be used appropriately. And, you know, there's obviously a ton of nuance about the power and sort of what the right way to handle it is. You know, at a high level, I'll say, thinking about what your topic is and what your focus is. Like, I'm thinking about the woman I interviewed that was going through a separation, like from her husband, and kept talking about when he did what he did. In fact, the husband showed up at the house when we were there and was very angry. He was angry in general. And then we were there with video cameras. You didn't know what the heck was going on. We never asked her about, like, it's one of those invitations for follow-up questions. When someone says, when he did what he did, you know, would you be able to talk to us about what he did, is like a natural follow-up question. In this case, we were talking about computer printers and digital photography and, like, you know, sharing the story of the young child with the extended family. The details of the marital infidelity, I'm assuming was infidelity, but I don't know, are not germane. So the person kind of puts the clue up there. We just let it hang. I mean, we didn't follow up on it because it's not appropriate to push.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed somebody. About their. It was a much more open-ended project. We were looking at kind of ways that people connected to their passions. I mean, we're trying to find principles that the telecommunications company could leverage for how people would or wouldn't fall in love with them. But we were digging deep into some personal stuff for people. And so the interviews were about life goals and, things fulfilled and unfulfilled. And, I remember sitting there talking to this woman. She'd been just describing her life trajectory and kind of what her parents allowed her to do and what opportunities they gave her and how she ended up, partway through her undergraduate degree, which was like a big deal in her family, getting pregnant and what that meant for her graduation and sort of how her life changed to be a mother when she was on this career track and, what approach they were taking to raising the kid. And I think the father was like in the Middle East on some like remote assignment. So there's just a lot of stuff going on in her life. So it was a very intimate interview. That's what the interview was about. And at one point I realized I'm like holding the camera, which sometimes is interesting because you sort of see, you're looking out at the person, then you look through the viewfinder. And I realized the whole time we've been having this conversation, she's sitting in front of this photograph that's like a misty rope bridge going off to an island. Like it's very evocative. And somehow I realized, she's talking about that. But she doesn't know what's behind her, right? She's looking at me and it's this amazing moment of cinema inadvertently. And so I said, this may sound like a non sequitur, but can I ask about this picture? So it was a weird question. I don't know why I asked it, but I just was struck by something. She turns and looks at the picture and she starts to cry. And I think this narrative that she have her aspirations unfulfilled and sort of hoped for, just with everything she'd been telling us, right? And the picture was like a gift from her sister. And, I can't even remember now. Did she literally say what I'm saying to you about the relationship between the two? But it was just, we all knew it in the room. And, the cry was not even necessarily sadness, but just a layer of having to hold it together kind of came down. Like there was, yes, there was some sadness for her. I don't mean it was tears of joy, but there was also kind of just something that came down. It was a profound moment. And, it actually led to a closeness and an intimacy between us. And there was actually more trust there.
Sure.
And again, I can't ask about the infidelity, but I can't, because we're talking about printers. But I can ask about, symbols of hopes and, fears when we're talking about hopes and fears. And in fact, I didn't ever say to her, do you feel like your life, you can imagine a really nosy, pushy, judgy question asked in good faith, right? That sort of points to the thing. But I pointed to a symbol of the thing, at least as I didn't know it was going to produce as dramatic a response. But that's what we're doing right in the field when we're trying to pay attention to signals and kind of pull some things together. But I didn't ever poke at it. I just kind of acknowledged that something was existing there. And she's the one that kind of tied it up together.
Yeah.
Without being too abstract, I think looking for gentle ways to, speak around the thing it's also, I think, more effective. So if you're uncomfortable, even if you are comfortable, I wouldn't necessarily say, so it sounds like you have unfulfilled aspirations in your life. Like, I don't know that I would necessarily do that. But to just do small sort of interventions, small questions, small things, kind of create spaces for the person to step into. Now you're being more of a facilitator of the conversation and less, to your point about discomfort, I think to kind of like go in there and say, what about this is uncomfortable, and I think isn't necessarily the most effective or the kindest way to go about it, but to sort of point to spaces and point to corners and kind of say, well, you know, this is about this, or is this, you know, and talk more about this. You are guiding, but the person is kind of taking you there.
Yeah, just have your antenna up or your radar on to kind of pick up on those cues.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
there's so many times I think that you get this sense that you get so much, like you just told us about, out of an interview. Are there times where you don't get that out of an interview, and you've got to come up with another technique that you think is important?
You know, I've done large number acts of interviews. I've had 2 that kind of failed. I mean, well, that's true. Many have failed, obviously, for various reasons. But in terms of, you know, a person that's there in good faith that that wants to kind of talk to you. But on the same project where we're talking with the person about the rope bridge, we talked to somebody else, and this was sort of an astonishing interview for me. It was a person that had no insight. Like they couldn't say, they could describe sort of chronological events, or we like to do this, or we did this, or when I was a child we did this, but they could never say, and that meant this, or I have this pattern, or they couldn't even go up one level. They were very friendly, very talkative, had lots of detail and lots of stories. It wasn't an uncomfortable interview, but their way of being in the world, and again, I've only met one person like this, was there was no follow-up question or probe or inquiry that I could ask that could lead us to any kind of takeaway from the conversation.
Sure.
At a certain point, it became for me almost like performance art. Like clearly there was no way through, but we'd agreed to spend 2 hours with this person, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. Like, and I think there's something about I can be stubborn. I wasn't being harmful to him. I was not being rude or creating any kind of jeopardy for him. But I felt like I'm going to keep going. Like, let me see if I can be persistent, because sometimes persistence is what makes this interview become something else. Like, I never want to give up too early. Like sometimes it's the last 5 minutes and the whole thing unfolds and you just get all this.
Yeah. Well, and that may be somebody you're only going to pick up an insight by observation or, watching their behavior or something where maybe they can't articulate it, but you can observe it. So
I do have a follow-up question, since Mike brought up, there's observations and there are insights. Can you sort of share with our listeners how you sort of move from interview observations to insights?
Yeah.
I don't know anyone that I've met who is more of a master than you are of insights. So,
but no pressure on that question, Steve. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot for me about iteration. It's like the lather, rinse, repeat on your shampoo bottle. Like, you just do it over and over and over again, and with increasing amounts of rigor. So, I left that interview. I mean, maybe the interview with the person who was crying was as a better example. I was with my colleague. We got in the car afterwards. I mean, we had a lot to talk about, like processing the experience. But also, drawing connections between the other interviews we've had, or just you talk aloud, and when talking aloud, you're kind of delving into this experience and like pulling pieces out and holding them up and kind of talking about them. And that's a practice, right? That's a discipline to keep kind of querying an experience or querying I want to call it the data, but the data there is the experience we had with this interview. We did a bunch of interviews. We talked about all of them. I like to write them up. There's like a very rigorous way of kind of documenting everything that, the field notes, the thick data from social science. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about turning it into a quick story that you just very quickly pull some pieces out. Because that is analysis, right? Analysis is breaking large pieces down into small pieces. So, I have an interview and I pull out an anecdote. That's the practice of kind of reaching back in and pulling things out. And sometimes we can be afraid to do that because, well, what if we pull the wrong one? But what I think it's about is building in the practice of like going back in and pulling something out and pulling something out. You're breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down. So you're doing that when you are writing up a quick one paragraph to post in Slack or email your colleagues. You're doing that in the car. You're doing that with a debrief worksheet if you want to do that. You're doing that when you're in the shower and kind of thinking about what happened. You're constantly going back and pulling things out. So that's the analysis part of getting to insight. So you take big things and you break them down. The synthesis part is when you take smaller things and build them back up. You start to say, oh, there's a connection between, oh, this is really about, you start to write a new thing that links together these pieces. But breaking them down, doing the analysis, pulling these anecdotes out. And again, we're still in the informal realm here, right? We haven't done any actual work. This is just driving and showering and interviewing and talking and like typing. Like this is just sort of the work of the work. And so that, I think, starts to get gears turning for me. And what I think makes it a safe space for myself is these are all intermediates. It's not like give someone a report the next day with all your conclusions. You're creating kind of wheels turning processes where you're thinking and reflecting. And as soon as you start breaking things down, your brain will start putting them back together. But, we talked before about falling in love with your solution. I think it's the same caveat there. You can come up with a conclusion that's exciting, but you have to be willing to dispose of it. And in fact, you want to practice making conclusions. It's that kinetic aspect of it that I think is really the habit to develop. So then that's sort of the informal part. That's the experiential part. And then you want to replicate that in a more formal way by going back to your data. This is the actual thing, your interviews, your recordings, your transcriptions, and looking at it at some distance. Just like I said in that story, I had a memory that this person was very aggressive with me. And when I went back and looked, it actually wasn't the case. So our memories of these things are distorted. And it's cool that they're distorted because they highlight, it's like some kind of filter you would apply to a graph or something, right? If you do like audio or video processing, it magnifies certain things. It introduces noise, but it also brings certain things into relief. So I like the inaccuracies in my recall because I have a check in place. I have all my recordings. And so to go back into those and listen to them and look for the pieces that you want to break down. Now you're really being more intentional. So I've got a 30-page document and I might pull out, 120 sort of elements. That's that more formal analysis. You're looking one by one by one by one. What are these pieces? And then putting them back together. This is where you get, your sticky notes on a wall or your mural board, whatever your kind of tool is, to take those pieces and start to see which ones are similar and which ones are different and how they kind of aggregate into patterns. And I think an important caveat here is the insights come from a set of interviews. Right? It's you break down everything and you put everything back together. It's not, I talked to this woman about her aspirations and my insights are A, B, C, and D. It's the observations. I like using the word observations. The observations are these things. And then when I put all these observations together, then I start to see the patterns. And then the patterns are much richer. It's now, it's a continuum like this, or it's a contrast. It's different people experience the same factor this way. You can tell a more richer story by doing that. It's a very hand-wavy version of a very hands-on process, but it's maybe a start.
I have one follow-up question for you, and then Steve will wrap this up. Mike asked you earlier, what are the implications of that miss where companies go for the local maximum as opposed to really looking at the big picture and focusing on whom they are serving. How do you make orgs or leaders realize, or at least make them aware of this missed opportunity?
Sometimes it can be in really tactical ways. This happened to me last week. I was working with a team where they're trying to figure out how to go and do field work. Yes, within the current context, but also it's new to them. They're a very technology-driven studio. And so we talked for a long time about kind of this problem and how they're going to approach it. And I talked to them about, so I gave them some advice about sampling, kind of a research nerd word, right? That it might behoove them to not just talk to the people they wanted to sell to. They might want to look for some IT stuff, or they might want to look at some laggards, to use it for lack of a better word, that to understand that who they talk to isn't the same as who they want to sell to. It's kind of a technology sales mindset at this company, like in a lot of places. They, go see your customers and see what their problems are is, that's great. And the way to kind of get beyond this maxim is to think about other people that might help them understand the problem space better, kind of separate from who they talk to. And I could hear, we were just on the phone, I could hear the light bulb, clicking on for this guy. And then, he took this great next step and produced overnight, an interview guide, a whole set of questions that sort of structured how he was going to go and have this interview, and then sent it to me for feedback. It was pretty good. I was really impressed at sort of the depth and so on. But there's kind of a tone there about kind of trying to the way you might write a survey that presumes that someone is going to buy your product. Please rank the top factors. To really try to drill. Here's all the things we want to know about. So we're going to ask you, about the cost of the installer and the network. They were super specific questions. And so I tried to show him how this question guide could be very much more open-ended, to try to ask people about, hey, what are your concerns? Or how do you make these decisions? Or what does this process look like? And then, make notes to yourself about, oh, you didn't mention anything about the business model with the installer. Is that a factor? So just trying to flip very tactically, what does asking questions in an interview look like? You need to know that you want to drill into all these things, but you need to start with, hey, tell me about, this is back to the nobody cares thing that Mike and I were talking about. Nobody cares about the world and the way that these questions are so tightly formed. So find out what they care about, and then ask what you care about in that context. I'm making little gestures with my hand, which is about sort of how I rewrote this Word document to try to reorient it. So you're starting broad and then kind of digging in. So that was my feedback constantly. And I think that appropriate for this person who is, got a different career path than I do, had never thought that that's a way to do an interview. You just ask the questions you want answers to. So I'm trying to reframe it and kind of empower him to think more broadly about who he talks to and how he actually has those conversations. And I think, if he does that, or if we do it and I can model it for him, that he can kind of see, then I think because he's a super smart person. This is not tunnel vision. This is lack of a mental model about how to actually get this information. So I know this person and this team, if we were to have these conversations, he's going to see all the opportunities that kind of come out from that. The ones he knows about and the ones that he doesn't know about. So if you can put a smart person who just can see, innovative possibilities together with some of these techniques, then I think, yeah, the local maxima thing is over. He's primed to do it. He's the person to do it. And I'm just trying to help him get to the point where he can see that information in that way.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You are one of the most avid foodies I know. So, what are some parallels between your passion for trying new and different foods and cuisines and your curiosity for uncovering people's unarticulated unmet needs?
Oh, I don't know. Are there parallels? Let's see if I can force one that doesn't sound too bored.
It's your next book topic.
I mean, they're both very experiential. They're both very, there's something very sensual in terms of engaging the senses about it. And it's the senses and the intellect that I think are both interesting. And some pattern finding. Food that's good is good, but then also thinking about why it's good. And, I mean, being a foodie, whatever that means, is, there's influencers or celebrities and I think I'm sitting in front of all my Lucky Peach magazines. Rest in peace, Lucky Peach. Lucky Peach, by the way, was like a combination of foodie, like food anthropology, inside baseball on the food industry. Like it was just this art. It was this amazing magazine that I liked because, I mean, to your point, it kind of tied all these pieces together that I kind of like and made me actually feel very excited about my work and also like getting to eat some food in some place. I don't know. I think something that's very experiential that stimulates you to kind of think about what's behind that. Why is this like that? Where does this come from? I had this profound experience in Copenhagen, going to, there's like a whole ecosystem where everybody has worked at these famous restaurants, and they open these smaller restaurants, and seeing something in a restaurant that was so weird. It was like plants served in a plant pot that was called dirt, but it was this like these baked grains. And, I think we're like sitting there on our phones while we're having this, and you realize, oh, this is like a derivation of something that was done someplace else. I'm not a person that knows about fashion. I mean, maybe that's obvious, but like, I think fashion is one of these things where, it starts here, then it ends up here, and then you end up with it. We end up with these things that we don't know where they came from. And I'm just starting to sort of see those patterns as a consumer in food. Oh, this was invented by this person and they did it for this reason. And then those people carry it into other places as entrepreneurs, and then they replicate it or reinterpret it. It was interesting just to be in that environment and sort of see literally dishes kind of being re-identified or reclaimed in other restaurants, but then also the ethos, like going to a sushi restaurant and trying to see like, oh, how is asking yourself the question, like, what makes this sushi restaurant like a Danish modern sushi restaurant? So finding those patterns, it's just fun. I think it's just fun, and you might read about it and sort of do some secondary research and find these patterns. I mean, that is what doing research is like. You sort of have these instances, and you have to ask yourself the question, like, why is that like that? Is that about that individual? Is that relevant to what I'm trying to find out about? What are these patterns? How do they match against what my organization, my client thinks the patterns are? Yeah, I mean, like I said with Lucky Peach, I love both those things and how they bounce off each other, but I hadn't really thought about the direct connection for me between those.
Well, thank you for that. I hope you didn't feel forced to draw that connection.
I'm forced, yeah, but
I'm very hungry now.
Yeah,
not to eat dirt, but something
good dirt.
Good dirt. Okay, well, maybe I'm in then. So, as you were talking, I'm a musician, and I started to draw the parallel. I love food too, but draw the parallel between music and how it's derived from another genre or another band or another artist. Similarly in food, and then you start to think about the corporation and how we've sort of engineered out any sense of art, and getting to a customer insight is a type of art. And so unfortunately, it's hard sometimes when you're in this black and white world of this is right or wrong. How do I pull those insights out in an artistic fashion. And that's a lot of the work we do, right? Of trying to get inside people's heads and emotions and behaviors. And oftentimes they don't behave as predicted. And then there's something in the background that was a derivative of that experience.
Right. What you said, Steve, the connection between being a foodie and just going deep to understand people's needs, wants, and desires is also a little bit getting outside your comfort zone, because trying new foods requires you being okay getting outside your comfort zone, and then probing and asking questions of people, going deep also requires you, as you mentioned earlier, getting outside your comfort zone. So,
or coming up against the edges of your comfort zone. I mean, certainly, there's lots of things I don't want to eat that other people eat enthusiastically, and just knowing, there's also a part here about knowing yourself and being able to hear yourself, and yeah, I wish I could eat everything, but I won't. So I can at least try, to recognize that. Mike, you talk about art, and I feel like it's not always okay to talk about anything that we do for money, I mean, in a corporate setting, as art, because that says that it's not valid or reliable. I certainly wouldn't market myself that way, but I think about those muscles, and I look to music and comedy and film that, I consume, but I consume with an interest in the process. I look for inspirations and analogies and so on for my own work. And I do think about it as creativity. I do think about it as art. But that's more about sort of my own practice and my own, like what's in my own head, and less about, me articulating the value that I want to bring to somebody else. So, building my own practice, looking to art as an inspiration. I'm glad you brought that up.
So what is the most unusual thing on your desk?
Oh, so I'm like, this is not even my desk right here. I'm in the podcast recording room, which is next to so I can't show you my desk because it's in another room, and like what's on there. I don't know if there's anything that's that unusual. It's the crap. I don't have clean desk behavior. So stuff just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. And in these kinds of layers, it's really bad. And so just all the cables, and so I'm just today when I'm talking to you, I'm just using the built-in mic and camera, but for my podcast, I have, it's not like Mike's mic. That's fun to say, Mike. I've got my Shure microphone with my external device that lets it connect in. And then I've finally given in, and I've ordered one of those stands. I don't know what you have, Mike, but I ordered one of those ones like they have.
Yeah, the booms. No, mine's not that fancy.
Yeah, I've got one of those because I think, maybe for something like this, if I didn't have to hold it like here and talk like I'm a reporter from the 70s or something, maybe I could get better quality. And then I broke down and ordered one of those, some kind of LED lighting. I'm in a room now where the window is over there, so it's not bad, but I end up in different rooms at different times of the day, and sometimes it's really grim. Sort of external devices, and it's going to get worse. I'm just saying, to your point, what's on my desk is unusual is like a lot of crap, I guess, that I need to clean up and that I haven't, and dust, and like external hard drives and so on. And I don't know, I may have to have a big project to it's the least favorite thing for me to do, to clean up and design and kind of attach everything.
Sometimes there's more anxiety when the desk is clean than when it's not.
Yeah. I don't know.
We're all creatures of habit, right?
Thank you so much, Steve, for your time. I know it's valuable, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing with our listeners. I think there's a lot of nuggets in there that people can take back and hopefully use pretty quickly. In my mind, I sort of kind of bucketed what you said into 3 points that will help me. One was around caring enough to solve the problem. I hadn't really thought about people not caring, and I don't know that they don't care, but they're in a system or in a situation where they don't have the time or the incentive or maybe the understanding to go back and say, hey, we really need to understand what the problem is before we go forward with the solution. The second one was something I'd call contextual bravery. Know when to ask what question, but don't be afraid to ask the right question at the right time. And then the third piece was around this persistence and iterative, rigorous process of digesting, going broad, going narrow, and pulling all that into something that's actionable and can make an impact for the customer and for the company. So really good insights, and we really look forward to hearing the stories about how people can learn from that and move forward with it.
Thank you.
And I'd like to remind our listeners about the free 30-minute coaching session we are offering this week to develop solutions to address your customers' problems and fears, especially now during this crisis. You will learn to use our Customer Solution Zoom tool that has enabled leading companies to identify opportunities to create breakthrough solutions. And don't forget to take advantage of Moves the Needle's resources for thriving during uncertain times at movestheneedle.com. And thanks again to our guest, Steve Portigal. It was a pleasure.